Hello. Hi, can you hear me? Uh-oh.
Hello.
Okay. Okay,
Can
there.
you can't hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you now. I can
Oh,
hear you
good.
now. Okay.
Good.
All right. Great to meet you, by the way.
Lovely to meet you as well. And it's a very different way in which you do podcasts, which is always, interesting, keeps things moving forward.
That's right. And
So
thank
do
you
you do it
for,
live? So this is a
yes.
live. Oh, nice. Love
Yes.
it.
So I'm going to play a quick clip
Hmm.
and then I'm going to do my intro and then I will introduce you. Take your mind into the wonderful world of physical, emotional, psychological, and spiritual wellness. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Kinetic Hour. Conversations with you and guests with your host, Kenan Wesley Mason.
Hello there and welcome. I wanted to make sure that you know how to get the most out of this Instagram account, but also all the information that we have for you on both of our accounts here at Gabriela Rosa Fertility and Fertility Breakthrough. Gabriela Rosa Fertility is an account where we keep our beautiful baby gallery, and from time to time, I also come in and do some reels and education and announcements. So one thing that you will find is that on the grid, on this very first place where you're seeing me, essentially you will see mostly baby photos. But if you click on the reel button, which is the one to the right of the grid, you will actually find a whole lot of reels and education pieces that I've done over the years. And if you actually, from this post, click on the top and you click on Fertility Breakthrough, you will find the Rosa Institute's fertility education account, where we have a plethora of amazing content that you will find and be helped by just literally clicking through and having a look at the posts. And from time to time as well, you will find some reels in the same place as you click on Fertility Breakthrough the account. So I hope that helps. We have been helping couples overcome infertility and recurrent miscarriage, even when other treatments have failed, for over 2 decades. So it will be wonderful to support you and guide you on your journey. There are many ways that you can get in touch with us, and you will find them on the bio link. So I look forward to connecting with you soon. And until next time, bye for now.
All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to another edition of the Kinetic Hour. I am your host, Kenan Wesley Mason. Welcome one, welcome all. Thank you all for tuning in as we are streaming live once again, streaming live on Facebook, streaming live on Instagram, and streaming live on LinkedIn. So welcome to all three platforms. As always, go to my YouTube channel right here, the Kinetic Hour, and that is KENNETIC, the Kinetic Hour. Click thumbs up, click the notifications, leave your comments, tell everyone that you know to leave comments regarding the comments so we can stay in the YouTube algorithms. So I'm always grateful for all of you tuning in. Thank you to all the new subscribers. Thank you for tuning in. And again, tell everyone that you know to tune into the Kinetic Hour. As I always say, whether it's one person listening or 1,000 people listening, my voice will continue to permeate. So thank you all for tuning in. And as you can see to the side of me, my guest, and I'm glad she's here. I'm just going to read her bio real quick. She's a fertility specialist, reproductive health educator, and Harvard University awarded scholar, and an accomplished business leader and entrepreneur. She's created the world's first entirely virtual and holistic fertility clinic. She's the founder and CEO of the Rosa Institute, which currently serves patients on 6 continents. And also will be going into the fertility breakthrough as well. Her treatment methodology has become an authority in its industry for identifying and addressing biochemical obstacles that guide couples in overcoming infertility and recurrent miscarriage, despite previous reproductive difficulties and failed treatments. She leads a team of holistic specialists that have educated over 140,000 couples in more than 110 countries. And I'm glad she's here all the way from Australia, the land down under. Please welcome to the Kinetic Hour, Gabriela Rosa. Gabriella.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for having me. It's such a wonderful, pompous introduction. I love it.
And thank you for taking the time out, because where I am right now in this very moment, it's tomorrow where you are.
That's right. I always like to say we're in the future. It's Australia happens to be in the future for a lot of in relation to other countries around the world.
That's right.
So yes, July 22nd. Here
right.
we are.
That's right. So thank you for taking the time out to be here on the Kinetic Hour and gracing the stage with me here. And I got so many questions here. I got 1, 2, 3. I got 4 pages of notes here. So
amazing. Let's go.
Yes.
I'm ready.
Yes. So so the first thing I want to do is just go back to the beginning. And why did you make the decision, or what events, if you will, or situations happened to where you made a decision that I want to go into not only the health and wellness field, but I want to help couples conceive. I want to help couples conceive. So what was the jump start for you that made you go in this direction of profession?
Yeah, it's interesting. I always have been very interested in babies. I think that, there aren't many souls around who don't feel some kind of connection to cute little beings that are just so, fresh and loving and, just new into life and just have a light about them. And so babies was really the first kind of thing. It's interesting because it wasn't from a maternal perspective for me. Like I do have 2 children, but it was really more a situation of like really seeing children as a way to create a better world, and really that's for me what made me decide that I wanted to, in some way, work with creating healthy families, healthy babies. And the initial kind of almost inciting incident, so to speak, I used to work for an obstetrician gynecologist whilst I was studying. And deciding to do and study naturopathy came to me as more of, really, I asked myself the question of like, what conversation do I see myself, or can I see myself? What am I interested in first? That was the first question. Then the second question was, what conversation can I see myself having for the next 20 years? And those 2 questions kind of, it helped me to go in a particular kind of general area, of and direction of life. Because, I think that as you're studying and you're trying to figure out what you're going to do with the rest of your life, I think people have less of that these days, of that kind of mindset and that way of thinking. I think that most people have had 25 careers by the time that they're 25.
Right. That's right.
And so, whereas for me, I had a more conservative mindset around what I wanted to do, and mostly because I really saw it as an opportunity to develop mastery in an area. And that was what I was interested in. I wanted to become really good and a reference in a particular field.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, with that in mind, then I started asking those questions of like, okay, what am I interested in? What conversations can I see myself having? And the first conversation that I thought that I would be having was something around pediatrics, was something around actually babies. And I was working for an obstetrician gynecologist at the time, as I mentioned, and I mentioned to him, I said, I might specialize in pediatrics. And he goes, Gabriella, that is the worst idea you've ever had. And imagine
All
this
right.
really loving, placid, calm, wonderful human being of a man who was, like Scottish accent, just such a lovely, lovely mentor. And still to this day, one of the dear people in my life, turning around to me and saying, this is the worst idea you've ever had. Whereas normally he was just so encouraging and enthusiastic,
Yeah.
about the ideas that I had. And so I was like, oh, this is interesting. I want to hear more about why this is the worst idea I've ever had.
Right.
And so I asked him, and he said, well, look, first, your patient is not your patient if you're working with babies, and your patient can't speak, because obviously you're dealing with parents. Typically, they are quite anxious. When a baby's not well, a mother is not well, and then the whole household kind of, goes into chaos.
Mm-hmm.
And so the second he said that, I was like, oh, I understand. And I agree. And let me pick something else, And
Right.
so that was really, these moments. And I think that the very big moments in my life and career, they happened in really quiet conversations. They happened in like moments where I was like, yeah, I can see that's not a good idea. Let me think about something else. The what to do, though, didn't come to me in some flash of enlightenment and, like, this is what you're going to do for the rest of your life. It was more like me going up the stairs to clinic and do clinic hours to finish my degree and coming up to a little poster on the stairwell and going, yeah, natural fertility, that's what I'm going to specialize in.
Right.
Literally, that was the extent of the conversation. And of course, I started to focus on that and have those conversations with people, started to work a lot with women's health, and was, pretty much involved in helping couples who wanted to be the healthiest version of themselves before starting to try and have a baby. And, I was kind of working with people who had been trying for about 6 to 12 months. It wasn't anything major, but I had developed a framework at that point to really make sure that I wasn't missing anything. Making sure that I was actually following a process that was consistent, that was standardized and structured, so that it could give me the kind of peace of mind that I was addressing all of the things that needed to be addressed. And about 10 years into that, I had someone be referred by someone I knew. And this person was infertile for 10 years. They had done multiple failed IVF cycles, multiple things that didn't work. And she comes to me to say, I want to do another IVF cycle. And so, I want you to treat me to have a better chance of it working. And in that moment, I was like, I really felt like, I don't know that this is going to be enough. I don't know that this is going to be what it is that you need. And she said something that changed the course of my life in a big way. And it was this. She said, look, I'm about to give up anyway. So I just want to be as healthy as I can possibly be. If it doesn't work, at least I know that I've given it my best. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense to me, And so I started working with this couple, because up until that point, I've always worked with couples and improving couples' health. And so I started working with them. And about 4 months later, they were pregnant for the first time ever, naturally, without the need for IVF. And I was like, oh, that's a bit of an interesting fluke, coincidence, synchronicity, whatever you want to call it. I don't think it was to do with this.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
was quite skeptical,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, okay, well, that's great, good for them, And so they ended up having a healthy pregnancy to term, had a baby. And a few months after this happened, I had another couple come into my clinic. This time, I don't even know how they found me, but they did. And they had been infertile for 19 years. And they had also tried IVF cycles that had failed. And by then, many natural treatments that also hadn't worked. And I was like a little bit emboldened by the fact that, okay, well, 10 years, maybe 19 years, there's not much of a difference. Although, again, I can't say that happened because of exactly what we were doing. But hey, that mindset, that idea of being healthier is going to benefit your life anyway. So when they said, we want to kind of do our best and kind of try one last time, I was like, okay, interesting that this happened again, but let's try it one more time. And long story short, again, few months after, they literally were pregnant naturally with their own eggs. And, by the time this woman was 44, by the time she actually ended up getting pregnant and having a baby. And so it was unusual and unorthodox that this would happen, because if you go to an IVF doctor at 44, they're going to tell you that you need donor egg, in this day and age.
Yeah.
But what ended up happening with that, which was really fascinating, was that I was still skeptical that, okay, that I was doing in a very structured way had actually led to those results. But at the same time, I couldn't say that it didn't categorically. And so I thought I would test the hypothesis, I'll test the theory that this could actually improve the chances of a couple. And so I started to pivot all of my conversations and my marketing towards helping couples prepare for being healthier who had been infertile or had experienced miscarriages for over 2 years. So people who had been trying for more than 2 years and had been experiencing challenges for more than 2 years. Now, the part of the reason as to why also I did that was that I noticed something really interesting about those two couples that I really enjoyed. Prior to seeing them, when people are trying still in that kind of 6 to 12 months, there's a lot of nervous energy and a lot of anxiety around, I need to be pregnant by yesterday. What I noticed was that when people had been trying for so many years, and they almost kind of like deep down in their heart, they knew they weren't done, but it was kind of like if it didn't happen, it wasn't going to destroy them. They had a different energy about them. They had a different kind of approach. They wanted answers. They wanted to know that when they were 90, sitting on their porch in their rocking chair, that they had done everything they possibly could. And those people were my people, because they wanted answers. They wanted to get to the bottom of things, and they weren't so much rushing to a finish line or an end goal. They were more focused on the actual process of getting there. And so in that pivot, I started to have those different kinds of conversations. And so then about 10 years on after that, I decided that I wanted to understand my success rate and what kinds of patients we were benefiting and who was getting a good result. And that's when then I decided that I would go to Harvard and do a master's in public health, really kind of understand what it is that we were doing in a different way. And, the result of that was immense, because I not only understood that, okay, this process actually was the thing that was making a difference. We understood that it was a 7-year analysis of 544 patients. We understood that we had a 78.8% live birth rate. Majority of the patients had experienced lots of difficulties in getting pregnant or having a healthy pregnancy. On average, they had been infertile or had been having difficulties for 4 years, plus or minus 2.5, and almost half had experienced failed IVF treatments, and more than half had experienced miscarriages before treatment, which, from the 78.8%, we ended up having 47.7 actually conceived naturally with their own eggs. And out of the entire patient population, only 5.6% actually needed donor egg, despite many being told that they would. So it took me about 20 years to realize that what I did actually made a difference to those couples in a very direct way. But now it's almost kind of like it's obvious to me who it is that we help, how we do. And of course, when I understand the types of patients that best benefit from what it is that we do, I'm now much better able to screen for those types of situations and cases and know that we're very likely to end up with a baby at the end of that entire journey. So it's changed things. It certainly hasn't been a slow process. I mean, sorry, it hasn't been a fast process. It has been a very slow process.
Yeah.
I've been doing this work since 2001, but we certainly do get results where other treatments have failed and people have been, in a very difficult situation and probably imagined that they would never be able to actually overcome it. And so that's been very rewarding.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad you explained that, the timeline, the timeline of that. And before we go deep diving, I read in your website that you had some things when you were younger that kind of, you know, entangled with what you do now. Can you go over that real quick? What
Yeah,
happened? What
sure.
happened with you? Because I think I read that something happened when you were 18 or 19.
Yes, I was 18. I will never forget, I had decided that I was going to come off the oral contraceptive pill, and I did, and realized that my periods hadn't come back. And I was like, okay, this is weird because, I'm 18 and I had regular periods up until that point. And it was puzzling me as to why that was the case. And even though I worked for gynecologists, I didn't want to go and, go to be treated by the same people that I was working for. It was kind of a bit weird. And so I decided to go to another clinic and talk to a doctor about why I wasn't getting my period. And so, I come in to this appointment and I say to the doctor, look, I've just gotten off the pill 6 months ago. I haven't got a period to kind of begin again. I'm not pregnant. I've taken multiple pregnancy tests. And literally, he stops me even before I continue the sentence and says, every woman is pregnant until proven otherwise. And I'm like, okay, so clearly you're not listening.
Right, right,
And that was the beginning. I should have known that nothing good was going to come out of that situation. But anyway, I proceeded to, explain that no, I am not pregnant, but that's okay. If you want to think that, do whatever it is that you want to do. And we will, get to the point where we're starting again because I am not pregnant. So anyway, so
right.
then what ended up happening with that was he said, look, just go have these blood tests and, call me in 2 days for the results. So I'm like, okay, went, had my blood tests, call in 2 days. Oh, yes. Oh, the results are back. Yes, you have polycystic ovarian disease. And I'm like thinking, okay, like immediately I start thinking disease, am I going to die?
Right.
And he's not really kind of being very clear about what this disease is. And so I'm like, okay, so can you just explain to me, like, is this really serious? Am I going to die? Like, literally, I asked the question.
Mm-hmm,
And he goes,
mm-hmm.
no, you're probably just never going to have children. And I'm like, oh, okay, so I'm going to live. But at the same time, I thought, gosh, that has to be the worst example of bedside manner I have ever experienced.
Right.
Like on the telephone, 18, you're probably just never going to have children. I'm like, what kind of like news delivery is that?
Right. Right.
But at the time, also, I think what was interesting in that moment for me, and I remember that moment like it was literally yesterday, because I remember thinking, okay, well, if I don't have children, I'll just focus on my career, you know? I'll
Yeah.
just focus on helping people and doing something else. Like I'm not gonna be devastated about it. That was kind of what I thought, right, in that moment. And I think that helped me to a certain extent because one, when you're 18, and I was studying at the time, so it really wasn't even the time where I would be thinking about wanting to have children anyway. And
Yeah.
like I said before, I think that there are very different types of people when it comes to feeling maternal. I think that there are people who they know from the time that they play with their dolls when they're 5 that like their entire life is going to revolve around having children and having a family, and that's their kind of life purpose. And I think that is amazing, and I think that is wonderful. I just wasn't that person. you know.
Right.
And
Okay.
I think that I wasn't that person because I didn't really have that example from my mom. Like my mom was a working woman literally from the time I remember. Like I remember myself as a tiny child, because my mom was a primary school teacher, literally going to work with her and being there for the whole day, you know, like either at school or playing with the other children after school. Like it was just, you know, like it was just like what happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for me, it was much more, and I think also the way in which my mum viewed, I think probably because, you know, 35 years of dealing with children and educating children and all of those things, probably it changes a person too. It's like,
Oh
you know,
yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely.
you're like very much like,
Definitely.
and you know, these classrooms, because I grew up in Brazil, I was born in Brazil,
Okay.
and my mum used to work there. And so, you know, these classrooms for one teacher is like 35 students. Imagine 35 5-year-olds in one
Mm-hmm.
room for, you
Mm-hmm.
know, a day. And then times that by 300 and however many,
Right.
right? And
Right.
times that by 35.
35
So my
years.
mom
That's
was
right.
my mom has always been very like, you know, this is how things are going to go.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
probably that was the thing that, like, you know, I didn't spend a lot of time seeing her with babies and, you know, taking care of children because she was like the children were a bit older, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that was part of what kind of formed my view of how life was going to go. But yeah, with PCOS, what was interesting about that, polycystic ovarian syndrome, which
Yeah.
is the number one cause of infertility of women in reproductive age in the world, really. What it does is that basically there is a metabolic component to it that impacts ovulation and regularity of cycles. There is a link with insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, diabetes, etc. So I knew that taking care of my health was going to be really important. You know, when I received that diagnosis, I realized that okay, I need to understand this at a greater level and at a deeper level, so that I can actually protect my health and my fertility for the long term. So I think that was the approach that I took, more than, you know, be focused on the fact that, you know, I got that particular piece of news. And so that really benefited me because I wasn't ready to have children anyway. I wasn't ready for at least another 10 years, actually. When I met my husband and we started going out, I told him, I said, listen, I was told this when I was 18. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to have children. So you
Yeah.
better know
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But he decided that he wanted to get married anyway. So we did. And then when I was about 32, we were kind of like, and we were together by then for about 8 years, you know, before we kind of said, okay, we definitely, now we want to start thinking about having a family. And so I started preparing my body and my health way before, so that when I got to about 32, I actually, you know, and we said, okay, I think that it's time, let's start trying. Literally, I conceived first go, you know, so there was no delay in my ability to conceive. Whereas that's not the usual experience for most women with PCOS. But for me, because I was already tracking my cycles, I already knew my timing, I already knew, you know, essentially what my body needed, it was a much easier experience, you know. So that was essentially the experience that I had. And then with my second child, so I had my first quite uneventfully, other than a 40-hour labor, which is not for the faint of heart, but that happened, and you know he came out eventually.
Yeah.
And then about 17 months, I remember at about 17 months kind of thinking, okay, I think I need to start preparing for another baby. But my periods hadn't come back yet because, again, with PCOS, that hormonal imbalance, irregularity, it was more likely and more prone towards, but I was also still breastfeeding. So I decided to stop breastfeeding, and I think I stopped when he was about 19 months and started to then prepare my body again for another conception about 17 months later. So it was a kind of like almost the same amount of time that I decided, okay, I want to have another baby, was the amount of time that it took me to kind of get things back to normal and regulate everything. And then I conceived with my second son, second try. So that again was, was a matter of preparation, because by the time that I wanted to be pregnant again, my periods hadn't come back. So had I not known exactly what to do, I probably would have been thinking, okay, this is not working for almost 2 years,
Yeah.
after it actually did. But it worked out well at the end. At the end of the day, I think that that experience also taught me a lot about what my patients go through, because it's easy to think that because we hear the drunken one night stand and the person who literally just gets pregnant by accident, and
Right.
that typically is the majority of the population. In the general population, people don't usually try to get pregnant.
Yeah.
It's literally have sex, get pregnant, have a baby, done. We're no longer having this conversation. And it's happening kind of like within that amount of time. 3-month period is usually what happens, 3 conception attempts. And
Yeah.
so as a result of that, most people think or have this idea that it's just going to be easy. And of course, we have our sexual education at school to also not thank for the fact that there is no education about what should really be happening or what really does happen in a body, in a woman's body, but also in that whole reproductive window, because we think that the second you have sex, that's it, you're going to be pregnant. And
Right.
really, the reality of it is that there is a 12 to 24-hour window in which it's possible for a woman to get pregnant. So it is not a situation of every single time that a woman has intercourse, she's going to be pregnant. And most people have that idea that, it's just going to be easy. We're just going to get pregnant. And then, of course, when it doesn't happen, they're left wondering, hang on a second, why is this not happening? And of course, they keep thinking, oh, the next cycle, it's going to be it, the next time and the next time, until they go to their doctor after 12 months of not being able to conceive. And the doctor basically just hands them an IVF referral to go and have, IVF, or to go and have an assessment that leads to IVF, as opposed to having that process of education and understanding that, okay, these are the things that need to be in order so that a conception happens easily. And it's not the case necessarily that just because it happens very easily for the majority of people, that it happens that way for every person. And so most people who have difficulty conceiving end up with this notion that there's something wrong with them, that there's something broken. Whereas actually, no, it's just the fact that there are obstacles for sure, because if that wasn't the case, you would be part of the 90% that it just happens for. But those obstacles are usually changeable. And, that's part of what I think is important to communicate to people who are not necessarily conceiving immediately, is that it's not a situation where, quote unquote, everything is normal, just keep trying, or it's a numbers game, just keep going. But the fact that, hang on a second, if it hasn't happened easily, and if it hasn't happened within 3 conception attempts, then we need to start asking, what are the obstacles that are getting in the way? Not whether there are obstacles. It's clear there are obstacles if you haven't conceived within 3 attempts. It's understanding what are the obstacles, and also understanding that fertility is a team sport and that it will impact both the male and the female. It's not just a woman's issue. And the more that we are able to have that understanding about it, then it's easier to be able to actually do something with that information.
Right.
It's like I like to tell the story of, like, okay, if you had a leaking toilet in your house and you don't know why it's leaking, how are you going to fix it? And I had this happen in my house, where I had like 4 plumbers come in and tell me all sorts of different things as to why this toilet kept leaking. In the end, I was going on holidays, and I said to the 4th plumber, I said, listen, just leave it off the base, and I'm going to come back and I'll decide what to do with it. Because by this time, they're telling me that they're going to have to take tiles off the wall. I had no tiles to replace. I'm like, that's where we're going to draw this line. It's
Right.
like, there are no tiles coming off my wall. So just leave the toilet off. I'll go on holidays. I'll come back. I'll decide what to do when I come back. So I came back and everything was completely dry. So I realized that, okay, this is not a leaking wall issue. okay, which they
Yeah.
were trying to tell me that the wall was leaking. I'm like, and that they needed this expensive $3,000 machine to come and check it out, and they were going to have to take tiles off. I'm like, okay, this is not sounding how I want it to sound.
Yeah.
So we're not doing that. Everything was dry when I come back from holiday. So I'm like, okay, great, I win. The wall is not leaking.
Right.
And
Right.
and then of course, I get in the shower, start my shower, literally turn around to the floor, and I just see the floor bubbling up. And I
Mm.
realized there and then what the problem was. I didn't have a toilet leaking issue. I had a shower proofing issue. I ended up needing an entire bathroom renovation and an entire new bathroom, not just the toilet. But
Yeah.
at least I knew what the problem was, because imagine I'm going to keep doing these remedies, these kind of short term fixes, removing tiles, patching this, patching that, for what? To realize that my problem is something else entirely. And this
Right.
happens with couples going through fertility challenges all the time, is that they're told, oh, just do IVF, that's going to fix it. So they go and do IVF and it doesn't fix it. And they've gone through and done 10 IVF cycles and they're still not pregnant. So hang on a second. It can't simply be a numbers game. It can't simply be a situation where everything is normal, just keep trying. Because in the majority of cases, you conceive naturally without needing IVF to begin with. And we know that the failure rate of IVF cycles per cycle is very high. It's between 60 to 70%. So we know that, hang on a second. Sure, the cumulative rate increases, which means that by the time you've had 8 IVF cycles that have failed, you have close to an 80% live birth rate. But guess what? Who wants to go and fail through 8 IVF cycles? I don't know if you know this, but in the United States, an average cost of an IVF cycle is about 17,000 US dollars.
Mm.
So, to have 8 failed cycles before you get to a point of like, oh, we're getting closer now. I don't
Right.
know about you, but I wouldn't be that keen. So
Yeah.
I'd much rather understand what's getting in the way first.
That's right. Yeah, that can get pretty expensive after a while.
Yeah, people
um,
literally they remortgage their houses to go through fertility treatment without success, which is
yeah. Yeah.
incredibly unfortunate.
Yeah, it is. And so many couples, they develop all sorts of stressful times for themselves, trying to force themselves to conceive in
Mhm.
going in all these different directions to do so. I'm going to put this on the screen here so we can kind of deep dive. I'm going to go here and I'm going to read this because when I was prepping to get ready for the show, I saw this here because I was kind of interested in when did all this kind of start. Now you're in Australia and I'm in America, so more than likely this is coming from an American point of view. But I'm just going to read this little portion here. The increase in fertility rates in the United States appears to have become noticeable in the mid 1980s, with a further increase observed in the mid 1990s. While data suggests a rise in the absolute number of women reporting infertility, some studies indicate that infertility rates have remained relatively stable in recent decades, with fluctuations that are not statistically significant, according to a study published in Fertility and Sterility. So I grew up in the late 70s and grew up all throughout the 80s. So my question is, why have so many women, or why are so many women having challenges today with conceiving? And also on the other side with men, why are so many men having lower sperm counts?
Yeah.
Can you kind of distinguish the two?
Yes. So how I think the question really needs to be, how is it that so many couples are having difficulty conceiving? So that's the first thing, right? Because fertility is, as I always say, it's a team sport. And
Right.
so really when we're looking at the ability to conceive and the ability to affect a pregnancy, those two things go hand in hand. Okay. So part of what's going on here is, I mean, look, there are societal factors, there are environmental factors, and
Right.
there is also a whole entire conversation about the fact that technology also comes and has a part to play in even understanding the problem, right? So let's disentangle all of that.
Yeah.
Part of what's going on in terms of you notice that statistically non-significant fluctuations in fertility or infertility rates. Now, nowadays, we have the conversation about infertility in a much more open environment than was the case in the 80s or in the 70s.
Yeah.
So part of what happened there is not so much about has infertility gone up or down, but the fact that we now talk about it in a way that is not as taboo as it was in the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
That's right.
So, that is one aspect. The second aspect is that we've had the convergence of medicine and technology. And what that has created is the ability for us to visualize and understand what's going on within the body in a much better way, easier way, faster way, and cheaper way than we could in the 70s, okay, or 80s.
Yeah.
And so now we are able to actually go and do a quick blood test and understand what is going on with the majority of our biochemistry, whereas that was not possible until probably the last 10 or 15 years in a really viable, commercially viable way, right? And that was affordable for people. And I mean, affordable, quote unquote, because in some places, even in the United States, unless you have insurance, it's completely unaffordable to have blood tests and to have, investigations done. And most healthcare systems don't tend towards in-depth and comprehensive investigations as a part of protocol and guideline for medical doctors. And so what ends up happening is that you will go to your doctor. Infertility is the only diagnosis that really there is that is time-based, which means that you self-report on your infertility, right? Whereas normally when you go and actually get diagnosed for a condition, guess what happens? The doctor will test you, they will run a whole bunch of tests to figure out what's going on within your body and why it's not working in the way that it needs to. With infertility, no. Infertility is diagnosed by somebody coming into the doctor's office and saying, I have been trying to conceive for 12 months and I have got no baby. The doctor has to do absolutely no tests to diagnose that person with infertility.
Yeah.
And therefore they don't, because the diagnosis is given. Right. The understanding of why such diagnosis is given then requires further investigation and testing. But as part of guidelines in terms of healthcare systems around the globe, it's really, there's 4 things that a doctor must do if they are going to actually do more. In some instances, they don't. They just provide a referral, go to IVF. The IVF doctor does a screening and goes, you start your cycle on this day. In places where you have universal healthcare coverage, like the UK, Australia, Canada, there is a limit to access, and there are very stringent guidelines to be able to actually go and do an IVF cycle, but the government covers up to typically 2 cycles. Whereas in the United States, you have privatized, healthcare systems, which essentially means that IVF becomes a money-making enterprise, right? It is a for-profit treatment. So there is less incentive for, really from a public health perspective to look at what is happening for this person, for this couple, for this situation. What is it that we need to do about it that does not entail IVF? Because basically, if we don't go down that path, the conversation, the narrative typically is, oh, you're going to run out of time to have a baby. But really, from a profit-making perspective, well, we're going to not actually profit from that particular intervention.
Yeah.
Right. So there's competing interests. And I think that one of the big things that happens, in fertility treatment is these competing interests. But if we go back to the fact that, the doctor will have done or not 4 different tests, which is this person ovulating? Is this woman ovulating? Do they have clear fallopian tubes? And is the uterine cavity actually able to host a pregnancy? And then for the male, it's like, do we have sperm? Those are the only 4 things that must be tested for a doctor to actually comply, tick, I've done what I need to do from a medical standpoint.
Right.
Now, that does not answer the problem. That does not
Right.
answer the questions as to why conception is not occurring, particularly when those are all of the tests that must be done. And then from that, the proclamation is, we've done all of the tests and everything is normal. Well, there's nothing normal about the fact that you've had sex and have not gotten pregnant for years. There is nothing normal about that. Right. So then that's where we need to take a step back and start to really understand, right, how do we disentangle this so-called normal, because I can't find something because I'm looking in the wrong places, right? The same way that I'm looking at my toilet leaking and going, well, it must be the wall, or it must be the floor, or it's actually not, it's something else entirely.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is the same problem that couples experience, is that the doctor is looking on the wall for the leaking plumbing and, or somewhere else. And they're actually not looking at the whole context of what it takes to create a human being from a perspective of like 2 people, 2 couple, two individuals that make up a couple. So that's the first thing. It's that, 1, are we looking in the right place? Are we looking in the right way? Are we reporting this accurately? And yes, we are having more conversations about it. So it sounds like there's more issues going on than there actually are.
Yeah.
But one thing that is true is that sperm counts have declined like hugely.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
In the last 15 or 50 years, that there was a big Danish study that showed a 50% decrease in a 50-year period of sperm. Now, the good news is that for the majority of people, majority of men, you actually don't need that much sperm to affect the pregnancy if the quality of the sperm is good enough. Now, yes, that quality and quantity is decreasing over time. And there are factors to do with environmental exposures that is leading towards that particular situation, right? So whether it's diet, poor lifestyles, drug, alcohol, poor nutrition, you name it, there are different aspects that really we know that will negatively impact sperm and sperm parameters. And so that is happening much more. Also, I mean, if you just think about it from the perspective of like the amount of chemicals in our environment today compared to even 100 years ago, we lived in a very different physical environment, when we are comparing those 2 things. And of course, our bodies are starting to show signs of that. And a decrease and a decline in sperm count and sperm parameters is one of those symptoms that our life and lifestyles and environments have changed. And especially because those cells are very sensitive to damage, it's going to be more apparent, that, okay, there is a problem here. And that's part of what we're seeing. On the other side of this, what we're also noticing, and that's when we talk about fertility rates declining, where people are having less babies. And sometimes there is a tendency to think that people are having less babies because of infertility, but it's also because of societal decisions of like, children are expensive, and do I really want to spend the next 50 years raising them?
Right.
So some people are making the decision really purely from a societal perspective and a personal preference perspective of like, actually, I prefer not to have children because, yes, it is expensive and I don't really see the value in that.
Mm-hmm.
Again,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
values and preferences decision, right? It's not to say that every person feels that way. And if you ask a person who really truly desires to have children and can't, they are going to absolutely tell you that that is not their decision and not their choice. But in society, we're seeing that choice be a viable option, whereas when I was growing up, or perhaps you were growing up, most people thought, the trajectory of life was you grow up, you go through school, you find someone, you settle down, you get married, you have kids,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Whereas children these days, and I can tell you from my own children's perspectives, they don't talk in the same terms. They don't talk in terms of like, oh, one day when I have kids. It's like, oh, I might have kids. I'm like, wow, okay.
Right.
And look, I'm not the kind of grandmother to be, right, that basically goes, oh my God, my children must have children and we must continue the line of it. I'm not that person. So if
Yeah.
they decide that they don't want to have children, well, it's less duties for me.
Okay. Okay.
But of course, I would love to play with those little cute babies,
Yeah.
but I'm
Absolutely.
not going to insert my opinion or my decision because I know that, it is a very personal preference that
Yeah.
people will have.
Yeah. 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 And having children isn't a life requirement. It's required to perpetuate life, but for the individual, yeah, it's not
Yeah.
a requirement to
Yeah.
have children. Many people live their entire lives on their own. They have their friends, they have their immediate family,
Yeah.
and they're content with that. They're content. Um, they don't have the quote maternal instincts that other women may have, and so they they just live their lives
Yeah. It's a choice.
accordingly. It's a choice.
Absolutely.
It's a
And I
choice.
think that it's wonderful that in 2025, it is much more of a choice. And
Mhm.
it's a choice on both sides,
Yes.
whereas men these days too are thinking, you know what, and I've had this conversation with a few of my friends actually, who literally go, well, actually, I don't know that I actually want to get married or be in a relationship, but I want to have a child. And so men are
Yeah.
choosing to be single parents,
Yeah. Yeah.
whereas gosh, in the 80s, imagine that. That would
Mhm.
be just like completely unthinkable,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah.
in this day and age, well, if you like, I have so many women who come to me and they're like, I've decided I want to have a child of my own and I want you to help me. I'm like, okay, let's go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, again, values and preference choice. And, when I have that kind of situation, I say, look, it's fine. I will help you and I need you to understand all of these things. What are you going to do when the child is sick? What are you going to do when you can't work for 2 years? What are you going to do because, that's what is required. And
Yeah.
so we try and think through all of those different situations so that they are not then putting themselves in a place where they're like, oh my God, I did not expect this. And of course, it's never going to be as hard as you imagine, right? Or sorry, as easy as you imagine, because you always imagine that it's going to be this hard, and then it ends up being harder, more expensive,
Yeah.
longer, all of the things. So everything is harder than you think. But at the same time, at least that initial kind of thinking to prepare is put into the equation, because it's not as simple as just like, oh, I want to have a child, especially if you're doing it on your own. I want to
Mhm.
have a child, and then all of a sudden, that's what happens.
Yeah.
Especially, and again, if you don't have a partner and you need to think through all of the different aspects of, like, if you're a man, well, what about who's going to gestate this child, and whose egg is it going to be, and how is it going to be arranged? And then, of course, on the other side of that, for a woman, it's like, I mean, it's easy enough to get donor sperm, but then how do you actually go about that? And some places there's differential access, there's different costs, so there's a whole lot of other considerations that happen as a result of deciding something like that outside of a relationship. Again,
Mhm.
very
Mhm.
possible, but definitely a lot of thinking is required to go and figure out, okay, what is it that I really want here?
Yeah. And not only that, but the emotional aspect of having a child for the man or the woman. Uh, Typically, the woman from by nature are more in tune with their emotional aspect of themselves, and also the psychological aspect of having children as well. Uh, what frame of mind are you in? Where's your mind at the point of not only conception, but after the child is born? How are you going to be able to relate to the child
Yeah.
on a
Yeah.
daily basis, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, and physically as well?
And your
All
support
those factors
networks.
matter.
Yeah, your support networks, like people say that it takes a tribe to raise a child, and it
Uh-huh.
is even more true
Yeah,
when you are doing it on your own.
yeah,
I think that one of the big differences that we see from the 80s onwards, in fact, probably earlier than that, quite a bit earlier, let's say, early 1900s, is that nuclear families really weren't the thing. Like people lived with multiple other family members and there was more support. And I mean, of course, in some parts around the world that's still the case,
right.
but in Western societies it isn't. And so we do have to consider as well the fact that it's not like getting a dog. The dog's going to last 20 years. It's way more involved than
Hmm.
that, and
Hmm.
catering not only for your own mental health and condition, as well as a child with or without a partner. These are all important considerations that I think people need to think through before they decide to have children.
Absolutely.
And I think that people are these days. I think people are thinking about this a whole lot more, like I said, than they did in the 80s.
Yeah, yeah, and along with that, because you mentioned nutritional factors, environmental factors, other stressors that could hinder conception. Um, you mentioned a lot about, again, going back to your website, and we're going to get to fertility breakthrough in just a sec. Um, you mentioned about blood sugar, the factors that poor blood sugar ratios have on not being able to conceive, and also do as far as nutrition is concerned, do synthetic hormones in the food supply, does that play a factor in whether, or does it play a factor in altering the reproductive system?
Yeah. So that's a really great question. And the reality is that anything that you are exposed to in your day to day will have a part to play. Okay. So from that perspective, it's something that we do need to be aware. Like the way that I'll answer this question in reverse.
Yeah.
Okay. Which is like this. When people come and say to me, what are the things that I can actually do to improve my fertility? I immediately say to them, act pregnant now to get pregnant later. And
Okay.
really, what that means is all of the things that you absolutely like. Imagine you gestating your child right now, and I invite men to do the same. It's like because you already are carrying 50% of that little baby you want to create
That's right.
within you right now, which means that you are gestating that child, even if in a pre-gestational period. And so what happens with that is that all of the things that you would absolutely do if you were pregnant right now, or that you would absolutely stop doing if you were pregnant right now, are the things that you want to start and stop doing right now in order to prepare to have the healthiest possible conception and baby.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm.
So that's going to be the approach. And so anything that you would refrain from putting in your body, in your mouth, in your environment, things that you would not do, like, weekend benders and, you name it, whatever,
Yeah.
right? If you are pregnant right now, well, those are the things that you really need to start implementing in your environment, in your day to day, in your lifestyle, months before you actually start trying to get pregnant. And why months? Well, because women are born with all the eggs they will ever have. So ultimately, what happens is that it's a maturation process, and whatever is in that physical environment, internal or external, is going to essentially have an impact to play on the quality of those eggs and the quality of the ovulatory follicle. And of course, for the men, we have the same situation where even though sperm is formed in a much more faster rate, and men are continuously forming sperm, it takes sometimes a good 3 to 4 sperm cycles to see proper change and improvement in sperm parameters. So even though a sperm cycle is about 3.5 to 4 months, sometimes it can take 12 months to see a proper change and a proper improvement, when we're talking about real severe sperm parameter issues. So those are the types of things that we do have to take into account. So yes, the food supply, the water supply, the day-to-day chemical environment, all of those things will play a huge role. So the more natural and organic we can choose an environment and a lifestyle, the better. The more that we can educate ourselves and understand about chemical exposures, even if it's from cosmetics. There's a wonderful, the Environmental Working Group have a wonderful website. It's called ewg.org/skin deep. And in that website, you can actually search and understand more about the types of chemicals that are in your body, kind of care products and makeup and, other things that, and how those things are actually impacting your health. I mean, we know that nail polish and nail polish remover, have many chemicals that are directly related to infertility and increased risk of miscarriage. So, it's all of those little things that we may or may not consider or think about that can play a role. And this is one of the things, I'm very passionate about this. I've been running a program that is completely free. It's called the Fertility Challenge. And I've been running this particular I've been running this particular program since 2011 for this exact reason, for helping people to understand what is it that I don't know that could be impacting me, and what do I need to do about it? So that essentially, I think that the one thing that people need to do and need to be able to understand is that their education around the things that will impact them is vital when things have not been straightforward. Accepting the status quo, or accepting that, quote unquote, everything is normal, just keep trying, is the surefire way to continue failing through fertility treatment and the fertility journey.
Yeah. And I was going to ask you about the fertility challenge versus the fertility breakthrough program, the two programs that you have. I want to ask you a couple of more things, and I got so many questions I want to ask, and I'm trying to be respectful of your time as well. What impact does early use of birth control have on the female reproductive system? Because even in my own family, and I've seen other women that I've known over the years that tell me that they started birth control very early in their life, in the teen years for many of them. What impact does that have on the reproductive system, and can it have an impact on conception?
It will be a differential impact. And the answer is yes. And here's how I'll answer this. We all have heard of people who have never smoked a day in their life and died of lung cancer. And we've all heard of people who are chain smokers and don't develop lung cancer at all in their lifetime. But they have cardiovascular disease, or they have some other, stroke condition or something else. The reality is that there is no free lunch, as I like to say. There will be an impact. What the impact will be is differential, because it depends on that person and how that person responds to whatever it is that they're being exposed to. So that's where epigenetics comes in. You can have the same exposure, but different people will respond and react to it in a different way.
Yeah.
right? So for some people, for me, I know that it triggered my PCOS. And there is some research out there that shows that, you know, the PCOS can be triggered by oral contraceptive treatment. So does it happen for every person? No, it doesn't. Will it happen for every person? No, it won't. But will it impact the body in some way? Some ways that you can see and some ways that you can't see? Very likely,
Okay.
right? And so this is the part that we need to kind of discern. And of course, and this is where values and preferences comes in, because would I prefer a teen pregnancy than, you know, having to manage my hormones later in life? Probably not. I'd probably still take the pill and, you know, then have to figure out the aftermath of that. But it doesn't have to be necessarily the pill. It can be other forms of contraception. And so understanding what your risk preferences are,
Yeah.
and also what you're comfortable with and perhaps what you are not so comfortable with is going to be really important.
Okay. Yeah, because yeah, I've known so many people that have been impacted by different types, like you said, different types of birth control,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's pill or insertions or injections,
Yes. Yes.
whatever the case might be. They do have or they can, not that they do, but they can have a long-term effect, uh, especially if when the woman gets into their 30s and possibly even 40s.
Yeah. And this is where, you know, the longer you, and then it becomes a question of the chicken or the egg, right? Now we know it's the chicken that comes first, but you know, before we knew that, it becomes a situation where, is it because of the oral contraceptive pill or is it because they're just older? You know, and so there's
Okay.
also that, because
Okay.
female fertility does decline quite substantially over time. Not to say that it's not possible to conceive in your 30s and 40s, it is. And in fact, you know, we're still having babies with people with natural conceptions up until 43, 44. But the reality of it is that, you know, and can it happen later? Yes, it can. Much more unlikely, much more difficult. You know, the chances become much smaller. So, you know, it's not to say, again, that it is absolutely going to happen. And I think a lot of these conversations need to be had with full understanding of what it is that is on the line and how it is that people prefer, you know, to kind of what are the preferences and values that people have that will dictate what I choose versus what I don't choose.
Yeah. 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 What value system have you set for yourself? Or parameters have you set for yourself, you and your partner?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
what parameters? Because like you said, it's a joint effort. You know,
absolutely.
it's
100%.
it's a
100%.
it's a joint effort. So everyone's opinions need to be respected and considered in the process. I'm going to go here because I want to ask you about Fertility Breakthrough. So, why did you create Fertility Breakthrough and why is it such the passion for you?
Yeah. I think that, you know, like, so one of the questions that you had asked before, which is what's the difference between the Fertility Challenge and the Fertility Breakthrough program? And the difference there is that one is education. It's about people understanding what it is that they need to do, and they obviously are then, you know, needing to implement on their own. Whereas the Fertility Breakthrough program is where we hold people's hands from beginning to baby and beyond. You know, we
Okay.
go and we uncover, we do all of the work to uncover what are the issues, what are the things that we need to address. And from there, we then start to put in place, you know, the transformation that's going to be required for people to be able to finally hold their baby.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that for me became such a huge focus, you know, in how I work and why I chose breakthrough is actually moving from a static place. It's actually going through and creating a different outcome. And so, you know, I know for a fact that when we help couples transform, and that transformation happens from inside out, when things haven't been straightforward, we end up with the types of results that we see, which are healthy babies that would never otherwise had been there
Yeah.
had we not being able to look at it from a much more holistic perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. And I see you also have your fertility breakthrough book. So
Yes. So
what can we look for
Fertility
in the book?
Breakthrough, the book is available free on Spotify and YouTube, so people can actually, and we're actually about to, from time to time, we do Amazon promotions for the Kindle version.
Yeah.
There's one coming up actually this week. So for people who are interested, and like I said, they can read and listen. Amazon is available, but also it's free on Spotify and YouTube so that people can actually have the education, have the understanding. I'm very passionate about people being able to access information and education so that they can make better life choices.
Yeah.
There it is.
Yeah. Yes. And that is you with your book right there, Fertility
Yes,
Breakthrough.
with shorter hair. I'm actually kind of
Yeah.
impressed how long my hair has become since
I,
that
s-
photo.
yeah, I see the difference. I see the difference. Yeah, fertility breakthrough, and another thing that I saw, and you mentioned it earlier in the broadcast, but I'm going to bring this up so everyone can see it. Let's see right here, and you mentioned this earlier about your success rate, and which I think is really important for people to know that you have a near 80% success rate with all the varying programs that you have with fertility.
That's actually in the fertility, that is in the Fertility Breakthrough program, and that
Okay,
is treatment. So
right.
through treatment, we have that kind of success rate.
Okay,
And, essentially the people who we help are people who have been infertile for a long time. Like I said, in this study, the average was 4 years of infertility. So,
okay.
it's definitely possible. Infertility, miscarriage, recurrent miscarriage, failed treatments, it's possible to overcome if you understand how.
Yeah,
That's the key.
yeah, yeah. And I think it's great that you have that type of transparency within what it is that you do. That way, people coming in will know up front. Okay, yeah, I want to go here because I see that they're attaining results for the couples that happen to come in to
And if we
fertility
can't
breakthrough.
help someone, this is the difference. I think that this is the biggest distinction that I see in how we approach treatment versus how most other clinics approach treatment. I don't take on a couple without understanding first, is there work to be done? Is there work we can do? Have we done it before? Are there any deal breakers? And how does that couple compare with patients like them who have gone through our program? How likely are they to take home a baby? So we actually do that first, and we do that assessment for free because I know the types of patients I can help. And I know the types of patients that I will not be able to help. So I'd rather that they go elsewhere and that we
Right.
have the resources to be able to provide to people who we can actually help, who will be able to do what it is that we need them to do so that they can have a baby. So I'm a firm believer on only helping people who I know are going to truly benefit from our program.
Mm-hmm. and and real quick as we get ready to wrap up here, and I want to thank you for taking the time out. I'm gonna absolutely have to have you back so I can ask you some
Be a
more of
pleasure.
these questions here. Um, but as far as because mental health is the big buzz probably over the last 5 to 10 years. What role does the psyche have on whether one conceives or not? Again, the stressors, I have to, I got to get up and go to work. I have these timelines. I have these papers due. I got to turn this in. I have to go pick up the other children. I have to do this. And
Mm,
I have
mm,
to grade papers. I got to do all these
yeah.
things. So what factors or what role does having a great sense of mental health, how
Mm.
does that play a role?
Look, I think that again, similar to everything we've talked about up until this point, there will be differential impact, right? Some people, and we can say this because we know that people in war zones get pregnant and have babies all the time, right? So it can't just be stress and its effect on, of course, being more relaxed, having good quality mental health and quality of life in general, that's life satisfaction, etc., is all going to help. It's going to help you journey through the experience, especially when it hasn't been straightforward. In some instances, deeply traumatic events can unleash, to a certain extent, havoc in the reproductive system and even impede some people from getting pregnant. But those cases and those situations are really a very small subset percentage of people who are affected in that way compared to the rest of us who, yes, mental health and stress will play a role, but it's not the only factor. And so
Right.
whenever I hear people say to me that they're going to quit their job to focus on their fertility, it's the worst possible decision they can make. It
Right.
is the worst thing they do. They're much, much better engaging in something that keeps their mind off the problem that they're having and contributing in
Right.
society and having access to be able to actually do fertility treatment because they can afford it, then quitting their job and going to focus full time on infertility. It's like it's the worst possible approach in my
Mm-hmm.
mind and
Mm-hmm.
in my opinion. So I don't encourage it. I think people should remain employed because at the very
Yeah.
least it's
Yeah.
going to help them have a different mindset and thinking of their day. If they find their job too stressful because of the content of their work, well, change jobs, find somewhere where it makes you feel more comfortable, but certainly don't quit your activities for the purposes of overcoming infertility, because I don't think that's the answer for the vast majority of people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And a couple of other questions real quick. And you mentioned this earlier, about women and the timeline for them to have children. Should women, because here, I've heard, and many people have heard in American society, um, my my timer is ticking. When they
Yeah,
get
yeah,
when I get into my 30s, the biological clock is ticking. So
yes.
do when women come to your clinic, which is virtual, anybody from all over the world can get in contact. Should women really be concerned about having children when they're in their 40s? Because I became a father when I was 40, and my daughter's mother, she was 40 as well,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
doctors were putting all this stuff in her head that, oh, you're going to have this complication, you're going to have that complication.
Mm.
So should women really be concerned with conceiving, or is it something that can be embraced? Because I saw on your website you had a woman that was 51 and conceived and had a child.
And that was with donor egg. So
Okay.
this is the difference, right?
Okay.
Whereas there are some situations where people will be able to conceive much later. I've had natural conception with one's own eggs. The outlier in my clinic was 47, but that is an outlier, right? And so what happens is in the vast majority and in the study, the top of the range was 43. And so
Okay.
43, 44, we're still seeing people be able to conceive and overcome infertility, have healthy babies. When it goes past that, 45, 46, 47, you then are starting to need to consider donor egg, right?
Okay.
So we support people in all of those times and time frames. So to say that somebody should or shouldn't be concerned about conceiving in their 40s, again, depends on their values and preferences. Some people are like, you know what? I want to make sure that I'm set in my career. I want to make sure that I'm able to do the things that I want to do in my life before having a child. And I don't mind using donor egg. So if that's something that I need to do in order to make this happen later down the track, well, then so be it. Other
Mhm.
people decide that they want to freeze their eggs. I don't recommend that if they're past, over 30, because it's much less likely that you're going to have a pregnancy and a healthy baby from freezing eggs past 30. Although, again, it happens in some cases, but you need like 20 eggs before you actually get close to a 75% pregnancy rate, which is not high. When you look at the grand scheme of things, you end up with attrition, you end up with eggs that don't thaw, you end up with eggs that don't fertilize. So, the whole freezing egg procedure was actually designed for girls who were diagnosed with ovarian cancer or certain types of reproductive cancers that needed to go and have chemotherapy and were going to be left sterile. So the doctors basically took a portion of the ovary that was healthy and froze that and used that as a possible insurance policy for future. But it's not to say that it's highly effective in being able to yield babies. So, it becomes one of those really challenging things. Now, I do have a patient waiting for me, so time is ticking indeed. But the reality of it is that, we have to take these conversations into the context of what is happening for an individual. For certain people in their 40s, their follicle stimulating hormone and anti-Müllerian hormone, which is their ovarian reserve, is still quite high. For others, it's diminished by the time they're 30. So, it's not everybody who is 30, everybody who is 40, everybody who is whatever is going to have the same experience. It is a nuanced answer that requires analysis and requires assessment.
Okay. Yeah, because so many, I don't know how it is in Australia, but I know here in the States, the stress levels become higher and higher. Again, the time is ticking. We have to have children by the time we're 30. And like what you mentioned earlier about whatever the family values were, you're going to go to school, you're going to go to college, and then you're going to have your children and be married by the time you're 25 or before you're 30. And that type of stress, it can have an impact. It can definitely have an impact.
Absolutely. Thank you, Kenan, for having me. It's been such a wonderful pleasure.
Yes.
And I would love to do this again, for sure.
Yes. Tell everyone real quick where they can find you.
They can go to my website, which is fertilitybreakthrough.com, or they can Google me. So it's Gabriella, GabrielaRosa. So Gabriela Rosa, fertilitybreakthrough.com.
Yes. And thank you again. I know you got to go. Thank you so much for tuning in, and to everyone tuning in and listening. Check out Gabriella. She has a wealth of information. Go to her website, and I'll put all of it up in post-production too. So thank you so much, and definitely come back to the Kinetic Hour, and we can go into a bunch of other questions. So to everyone listening and watching, until next time.